Welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. Our theme for 2026 continues. The future of work, meaning is the new money. Because meaning is simply the greatest motivational force on earth. But 68% of the global workforce is disengaged, leaving $9.6 trillion in productivity on the table every year. Gen Z, the canary in the coal mine, is exposing structural failures everyone else learned to ignore, rationalize, or endure. I'm Dr. John Dentico, your host, bringing over 30 years of experience in leadership, strategic thinking, and designing solutions that solve real problems. This podcast delivers boots-on-the-ground intelligence, real conversations with CEOs, fractional executives, coaches, and small and medium-sized business leaders navigating the same crisis, mitigating the talent hemorrhage before competitive viability disappears. We go beyond symptoms like engagement scores and wellness programs to focus on the structural failures beneath them. Frontline intelligence, actionable frameworks, hard truths. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Now let's throttle up and dive into today's episode. Hello again, and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Dr. John Dentico. With me today is Stephen McNicholas. Stephen has spent 3 decades discovering something most leadership development programs miss entirely. That great leadership isn't developed through a series of singular events or training sessions, but through an operating system that runs consistently across every level of an organization. Stephen has led teams from the front lines to the boardroom, primarily in private equity and financial services. And he's refreshingly honest about the fact that his 30-year journey includes both wins and failures. That practitioner's perspective drove him to research what actually works. He interviewed over 100 highly successful leaders you've never heard of and uncovered a repeatable pattern, what he calls leadership success engineering. Steve's core insight challenges conventional thinking. Most organizations isn't strategy or talent. It's the distance between what leaders say they'll do and what they actually get done. When every leader runs leadership their way, you don't get excellence, you get chaos. As co-author with New York Times bestseller Jack Canfield and author of Unlocking the Success Code, Steve has made it his mission to help 1,000 leaders per year discover their true potential. His emerging framework isn't about adding another leadership development event to the calendar. It's about installing the operating behaviors and accountability standards that make leadership predictable, scalable, and effective. If you've ever wondered why capable executive teams with solid strategies still fall short, or if you're tired of the frictions, silos, and excuse-making that dominates too many organizations, this conversation is for you, and I'm truly pleased and delighted to have Stephen here with me this morning. Good morning, Stephen. How are you?
Good morning, John. What an introduction. I sort of known I've been busy and interested in this topic for a number of years, but to hear you sort of summarize it like that, it gives me a warm glow. Thank you.
I will send you a copy, and as I tell people all the time, it's suitable for framing on your refrigerator. You can put it up there and the world will know, or at least the people closest to you will know. So I appreciate it. Stephen, let's begin by me asking you, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up, and what were some of the influences in your early life?
Well, what's a simple opening question, John? I'm actually not used to talking about the older days, but I'll give it a go. I was born in Liverpool. For anybody unfamiliar, it's the city that gave the world the Beatles. Hopefully they've heard of the Beatles. I grew up there for the first 22, 23 years of my life. John, mum and dad, I'm one of 3 boys, proper working class UK family. I'm not embarrassed to admit it. I failed education. I was a bright guy, but I was distracted. I was the type of student that would promise to start studying next term or next year, and suddenly before I knew it, examinations were catching me out. So I didn't go on to university like many of my friends did. I'm really okay with that because it was the catalyst for me to take ownership and accountability for myself, let alone for anybody else. And that was it was about then 18, 19. I somehow managed to get my first role in financial services. For almost the next 2 decades, something happened in how I went about my role and career that I was continually given the opportunity to do bigger and more strategic jobs. And this guy that failed education in the city of Liverpool went on to be an executive in some of the biggest global banks. And that took me through to the financial crash of about 2008, 2009. That was the catalyst for me to make decisions about where I went and how I progressed my career. That's when I was sort of stepped into the private equity world. I'd sort of gained a reputation in financial services as almost this leadership fixer, this guy that was parachuted into functions and departments across the planet to fix the problems, which typically came from a leadership issue. Private equity was another step into that space. We did a couple of transactions for a number of organizations. And it was the first time I got to talk to leaders in other sectors, in other roles, in other functions, in other businesses, and started to ask the first sort of seeds of what is it you do? How do you succeed, etc. And that just festered until about 2015, 2016, when an opportunity came for me to sort of break away and pursue this passion I have for personal development, particularly for helping leaders. As you said again at the start, I am no guru. If I ever come across or profess to be a guru, then please call me out. Much more of a practitioner. I have the bruises, the scars, and the lessons from sort of doing leadership well, but easily from getting it wrong at times. And over the last several years, John, I've developed my business, wrote a couple of books, stood on stages, been invited to stand on stages internationally, but I'm most at home. I feel most alive when I'm sort of sat in front of a group of leaders at all levels, at all different experiences. I can share my thoughts, share my models, share my frameworks, which you called at the start leadership, success, engineering. And here we are today. So a guy that didn't make college or university, and I'm now talking to some of the brightest leaders in the UK particularly.
Great. And the School of Hard Knocks teaches you a lot, let me tell you.
It's a great school. It's a
It's a great school, and you learn by doing. And I'm a great believer in learn by doing. You can only take the theoretical concepts so far. I've always been the kind of person who enjoyed the theory. It gave me the background. But I consider myself to be a process engineer in some respects. Okay, that's the theory. Well, turn it into reality for me. How do you take that and do something with it? I always say that there's a difference between being a leader and doing leadership.
Yeah. Do you know what? That point, John, is so pertinent. Sorry to cut across you there, particularly the engineering word, which effectively sits at the heart of the models and frameworks. And the next book I'm working on is when I get to talk to organizations who recognize they've got a problem with leadership, they'll often say to me, yeah, leadership development, all you gurus do the same thing, etc. And I suspect I'm in the minority, like you've just said. Although I spend 2 days in a classroom with delegates, it's the next 100 days of implementation, execution, practice, learn. That's the bit where I think the return on that investment is truly delivered. And I've been to thousands of workshops in my careers where I've gathered manuals and books and leaflets, and they're all on a shelf. All they give you is self-esteem as opposed to making you any better in the day job. So I resonate with your point there. The doing and the trying and the practicing and the trialing, that's when real growth, and that's when the magic happens.
All of that is the basis for the work I've done in simulations and creating the Lead Sim simulation, which is a robust practice field for leaders.
In a safe environment.
A safe environment using realistic scenarios.
Yeah.
And that a lot of that, I'll be very blunt about it, a lot of that came from my work as a strategist and naval officer. When we did practices, when we did conceptual approaches, we talked about what was really going to go on. The real issues, the challenges, the threats. I took that concept and modified it significantly to create an environment where people have to do leadership against a complex set of issues and challenges. And it worked. People would step back and realize, well, I can't get there from here unless...
But that's the theory. and then there's the chance to apply it. And, that's when the magic happens. That's when growth, understanding, and that's when people truly, truly do grasp leadership, as opposed to just staring at PowerPoint.
I agree. I make a differentiation between leader development and leadership practice and action. The question for me, and I'm sure you've seen this, Steve, is we do these singular leader development events over and over. We tell the same story. It's the whole human kind of approach. Be a better person, have better traits, all these different kinds of things, right? And then we say, okay, now take that knowledge and go do something with it.
Yeah.
For me, I'm concerned with the conversion factor. Can you take the information and convert it into action? And you're absolutely right. Still today, there are so many leadership development programs that focus on leader development, hoping the person will be able to convert it into action. I liken it to the world's biggest spaghetti throwing contest. Let's throw as much training against the person and see if something sticks. Can they implement it? Can they do it? And it takes time to learn the process, the way to come at it and process it. So we're on the same page.
I think we are. I know we are. Those events, John, they just create awareness. And there's nothing wrong with that. Awareness is better than nothing. I'll give you a real case study. It was just after the sort of Christmas holidays. I got one of them great emails from a potential prospect. Can we talk to you in the new year about working with leaders in our organization? Of course. So I jumped on a call on Monday afternoon this week in the UK. And the director of HR said, we have a one-day event. She even called it that, an event. We have 200 leaders from the organization, Steve. Could you do your stuff for 90 minutes? Mid-afternoon, please, which is invariably when people are getting tired, the sort of brain slowing down. And then we're hopeful that for the rest of this year, leadership will go like that. I went quiet as she said, oh, you've gone very quiet. Is this not of interest? I can do that, but you are going to give me X thousand pounds, and I guarantee you the return on that investment is negligible, if any. She's like, well, suppliers don't normally talk like this. My point was exactly this, John, that I can provide information and develop awareness of the engineering methodology in 90 minutes. Of course I can. I love to talk about my stuff. But I guarantee you that by coffee break at 5 p.m. that afternoon, the next speaker's information will have completely overridden mine. So they've gone away and they're thinking about it. And they may come back and say, let's do some models, let's do some training, let's do some workshops. But I was trying to do my best and give this HR professional an understanding of it's the implementation that drives the efficiency and the effectiveness and the practice and the learning. And to use your expression, the simulation. It's not listening to some guy talk for 90 minutes. So we'll see.
No, I love it. Yeah, we're on the same page. We understand it. And that's the problem. It's the leadership get-rich-quick model.
Yes, good.
We're going to teach you 6 things, and tomorrow you'll be making $1 million. Not really. I don't think so. It takes time to develop the proficiencies. Take anything else in life, whether you're, and I have people I've talked to all over the world, especially from India, I've talked about cricket players, football players. You just don't walk onto the field and become an instant sensation. Years of practice, years of showing up and failing, not getting it right until you finally break the code and say, this is how it works for me. And that's exactly what people don't understand. They think that somehow we're going to sprinkle gold dust on 200 people in 90 minutes and everybody walks out covered in gold and being able to do whatever the organization asks them to do. It just doesn't work that way.
Correct.
So we're on the same page, and I agree with you 100%. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions here. In your work, you've identified the gap between what leaders say and what they actually do as the throttle on organizational performance. And this is something I'm really into myself. We say one thing, and then they reward something else. I'm sure you've seen this, right?
Mm.
In your experience, is this gap primarily a failure of clarity, capability, or commitment? And does the answer change depending on which level of leadership you're looking at?
Oh, what a great question. Well, I think there's many facets to the answer, John. I'll try and summarize it, if I can, in a couple of minutes for you. It's the essence of what I try and help organizations with. And I'll say organizations in this situation as opposed to leaders themselves, because they become next in terms of how we go about it. I call it the intention versus outcomes gap. The vast majority of leaders in any organizations have the best intentions. They want to deliver. They make promises and commitments. They get the strategy and they're excited to go away and implement it. But unfortunately, there is this gap. Yes, I understand. And, oh, no, we didn't quite deliver. Oh, we missed the forecast. Or, oh, we came up short on the objectives. This gap or this vacuum is the purpose of my career in the last decade. What is it? How does it occur? And how do we fix it? And I go back to my earlier comments or your earlier reference that when I was writing the second book, The Success Code, I got the chance to speak to lots of fellow practitioners globally who do this leadership thing really well and rarely have that gap. They know how to take intention and deliver it to results. And when I began to talk to these people over a couple of years and started asking them the questions that you're asking me as to what is it? How do you do this thing? They might have had different labels for different things, John, but essentially they were saying the same things. There was about 6 or 7 sort of critical themes that sort of begun after about 20, 30 interviews. I was looking through my notes and thinking, they're all largely saying the same thing. They call it something different. So that began the research of what are these 7 things? How can I distill them? How can I capture them? Ultimately, they hang off 3 foundations. How does the leader self-lead? How does the leader team lead? And how does the leader performance lead? Whether you're a CEO or a first level team leader, those 3 anchors are fundamental to the engineering model and methodology. And I began, when we start to sort of implement this, it's almost the way I describe it is the operating system, is that you and I have both got an iPhone, probably. Millions of people have got an iPhone. But if you try and find one iPhone that looks and operates exactly the same, with all the same apps, the same screen colors, the same wallpaper, you'll struggle to find one. We have a family of 4, we all have iPhones at home, but they're all completely different. However, they all operate off the same operating system. Every iPhone does its magic because the operating software or system is identical across the planet. Yes, you can personalize, but it absolutely operates the same way. And when leaders in the organization are encouraged, even compelled, to do the foundational operating systems the same way, success happens. That gap gets closed. It doesn't stop flair, talent, interpretation. It doesn't restrict. But what it does say is these are the non-negotiables. These are the things that if you wear the leadership badge in this organization, this is how we are going to operate. And it's the same in McDonald's. You can't go make a cheeseburger in one store a different way than a store 100 yards down the road, otherwise there'd be chaos. It says, here's how we make a cheeseburger. That's the principle that I built the methodology on, John. But more importantly, that's what about 120 leaders across the world in various conversations effectively endorsed. They talked about self-awareness, and they talked about accountability, and they talked about enablement and other themes. I distilled that, put it into the framework, applied it on a couple of organizations in a practice environment, and we saw improvement, growth, and predictability. When leaders set intentions, they were able to execute and deliver on them. And that, I apologize, I'm getting a bit passionate and talking nonstop. I will pause, but that's ultimately the answer to your question.
Very interesting. In fact, you've opened a door here. I'm going to go through it. Are you familiar with EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, at all?
The hesitancy is there are so many operating systems now that exist on the internet, particularly in my research. I probably am, but I'm not going to say I'm an expert in it, John. So remind me.
The book is called Traction. It was produced in 2012, and I'm actually going through it right now because
right.
It was presented to me as the odds-on favorite for small and medium-sized businesses. It was introduced to me by a woman by the name of Sarah Daw. Do you know who Sarah Daw is? She is the CEO of the Liberty Group, the
All right.
largest fractional combined organization. They have 1,500 fractional folks working in different venues in different areas. I had her on my interview a couple of months ago, and we communicated back and forth. She was the one that said to me, you know, the thing that everybody is kind of wrapped around right now is the entrepreneurial operating system. So I started reading it. I'm about 100 pages into it. And I'm finding, this is John Dentico's interpretation. EOS is a management system. So far, it's leaving a lot of gaps for me in terms of leadership. And I'll just cut to the chase, and I'd love to get your reflection on this. Because when they talk about leadership, they're talking about the leaders in charge. It's a positional, what I call a positional model of leadership. Leadership is what the leaders do. As opposed to, and I believe this, I've talked to people from all over the world now on this, and there's a great deal of agreement that leadership is really more about an influence relationship. And anybody can have influence.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays when you take even younger folks who are spending time with AI systems doing what if scenarios or looking at strategic issues. So the world is it's a great adjustment right now. Now, I'll be honest with you and tell you that I've created in the last couple of months something called a Throttle Up OS, my own operating system, that I believe is a leadership system that would sit alongside something like EOS. I have more work to do on that, more granular issues that I want to tease out and see where that takes me. So very interesting. I would just mention that it seems to be the one that people default to, EOS. I guess what I would ask you at this point is if you might have any reflection on what I've said so far.
Yeah, I do. And I was smiling with sort of recognition of the observation that you'd made, even on those 100 pages of the EOS, the operating system. And actually, John, the smile of recognition at my end is because the 7 themes that leadership success engineering, or the operating system for my methodology, is largely, not entirely, influence-based sort of themes. When I reflected on my own career, when did I win and when did I lose? And a lot of the wins over 3 decades was when I, as a leader, was influencing through behavior, mindset, attitude, not at all when I was telling. And the leadership operating system that I preach about and talk about and try and coach is fundamentally influential based, but it's still non-negotiable in that sense, John, that if you're going to lead in this organization and we're going to apply and commit what Steve McNicholas is asking us to do, then when it comes to communication, we want to communicate with candor and clarity. Now, there's no rule set for that. There's no, you go on a 1-day workshop and suddenly you're the most honest, candid, clarifying leader on the planet. It's a choice you make in those moments of, shall I be a coward here and just give a story that keeps everybody happy, it makes my day and gets me off the hook for a week? Or shall I be candid and really tell people how I feel, how things are, or how I see? Or is it somewhere in the middle? And that's the sort of choices and the dichotomies that leaders make from the most junior level to the most senior every day. But what the system demands of you is that you don't ignore it. You don't fabricate it. You don't bury it like a lot of poor, average and unsuccessful leaders do. So that's one small example, John, where it's the influencing element of the system, not I've got a big stick and I'm going to whack you, because unless you're doing these 7 things that we've been told to do, you're not a leader. It's a million miles from that. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I agree. I think you have to be open to that. I can't tell you how many podcast guests I've had. We talked about this notion of vulnerability,
Yeah.
the ability to be open, to listen to others say, you're not on the right track. We're going to mess this up. And let me tell you why. Let me give you my reasons. Let's hash it
Correct.
over, that kind of a thing. As opposed to, as you say, we're doing it my way or the highway. So I absolutely agree. One area I want to talk about, I know in your work you've mentioned this, and I think it's very important and indicative of this influence dynamic, and that is the scalability of leadership. Okay, the scalability. Sarah had a LinkedIn video exchange a few weeks ago. There were about 10 of us online with her. One of the issues she's dealing with is CEO burnout, burnout from CEOs, and that there's so much on them that many are choosing not to be CEOs. Many are burning out and leaving long before people would think they would, and leaving gaps in that position. So let's talk about scalability. I want to use the example. I want to use this as an entree to talk about that. And that's so many times I hear about things like empathy. Empathy is we need a leader that's empathetic. We need empathetic leaders. Okay, fine. Or vulnerable leaders. Okay, fine. The problem that I see is this: the leader can only do so much. Scaling leadership beyond the leader is impossible because the leader is the capstone. The leader is the top of it. So when you take a trait like empathy or vulnerability of an individual, when that is transferred to the group as a whole, when the traits become values, let's talk about small business. When 20 people operate with a sense of empathy and vulnerability and the ability to accept influence, good or bad, that's coming their way, leadership becomes scalable because, as I like to say, leadership is what people do together. I'd love to get your reflection on that idea, the scalability of leadership, not just at one person level, but in order to scale it, you need to get past that. Go
Yeah.
right ahead.
Yeah. And I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about this point in the context of private equity.
Okay,
And the reason why I'm going to talk about it is I'm not aware of many more sectors or operating environments where the pressure and the expectation to perform and deliver at the very top level, typically the CEO in this instance, John, is any more intense. I'm sure every sector, aviation is incredibly difficult and stressful, and health, etc. But in private equity, I sat round many board tables over many, many years across many organizations and observed several CEOs, some good, some not so good, some in the middle. It's usually the numbers and the sort of amount of return that the private equity investors made on the business. The moment you talked about CEO burnout, the question I get asked most now when I do some fractional work, typically from private equity houses, they will ask me to look at an organization they're thinking of investing in. Usually they'll say, can you give us an assessment of the leadership capability? Is it scalable? To your word, John. When I go and have that first hour with the CEO, if they are exhausted, mentally, physically drained, if everything around them is on fire, then I immediately land on, which is why you don't need an education to work this stuff out. I immediately land on the point of we have a problem with scalability here, because all roads are leading to this one individual that has the title CEO. All most C-level roles in this environment are struggling, are overwhelmed, to use the label that you give, typically burnt out. And when I run the diagnostics to sort of form a view as to why that is, it goes back to the point that we were discussing several minutes ago, that below that CEO level, there is a glaring lack, a huge gap. And some of it is because they've never been told, taught, shown, helped, coached And some of it was because it's optionality. They've chosen not to be A, B, C, or D. But I usually, 8 times out of 10, tend to land on the conclusion, and you can use empathy as the example, that a whole host of them actually lack the operating rules, the operating system, the methods, whatever we want to call it, culture. We've been talking about leadership for about 40 minutes, John. We've yet to use the C word, but culture I'll use in this instance. It's glaringly absent. And that burnout and that executive level is struggling, because when they open the door, walk out in the office to look for those fellow advocates who can help them, there is none. There's lots of people, but there is none who are on the same levels as, the CEO in this instance. And I'm still good friends with lots of people who held CEO positions in private equity particularly. And I'm just mentally sort of running a list now through my mind. I think 2/3 of them have stepped away from the role in the last couple of years for the reasons we've said, that the pressure and the burden they carry day in, day out, let alone for the organization, but with the investors' expectations on their shoulders as well. Not many of us can withstand that and sustain. The people that are still doing it, however, John, they're the ones who are running organizations where there's a thread of empathy from the top to the bottom, where there is a thread of accountability from the top to the bottom. When that exists, and how it gets there could be about operating systems, could be about legacy. When it exists, the organization thrives. When it doesn't, the CEO tends to say, I'm out of here.
Very, very interesting, very insightful. I have to wonder, what is it that keeps CEOs, when they're got the job, when they're the person in charge, from developing that next strata, that next level? What's in the way? Is it habit? Is it ego? Is it we don't know how to do this? We don't know how to build a team, if you will. I mean, sports is a great way to understand teams and team dynamics. The coach, you could call him the CEO, he's not on the field. It's the players who get it done. I've made this observation several times in previous podcasts. I said, we've raised all the leadership training that I've run into has raised a generation of Jedi Knights. And their job is to come down and brandish the lights and vanquish all the issues and problems that lie before the organization. Well, no wonder they're burned out. That's a hard job. Okay. And what I say now is the CEO of an organization is they got to take a step back and think of themselves more like Yoda, the teacher, the facilitator, the influencer, the person that says, I'm not going to do it, you're going to do it, who then raises a generation of Jedi Knights in their organization with the knowledge that once you graduate and become CEO, you are the new Yoda. You're not the old Jedi Knight. You know how it gets done, but you're really the Yoda. You're bringing the whole capability and the process together. I'll be the teacher. You be the implementer. And I think there's another thing here that I've always struggled with in my mind, and that is I think people at some level believe that if I'm the one who's going to be criticized, then I should be the one who's in charge.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense at all. I need to be the one in charge because they're going to beat me up. And the answer is, well, if they're going to beat you up, that's because you haven't put a operating system, an ability in place that actually does the job. You have to fight for your ideas. You have to defend your people. You have to take the brunt of it, knowing that the system you're putting in place will gain traction and eventually do what needs to be done. I'd love to get your reflection on that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Star Wars. So when you talk about Yoda and Jedi Knights, well, I know exactly what you're talking about. I can actually almost picture the little green Yoda in some of the movies espousing his wisdom. But what I know Yoda used to do really well in the movies is he would pose scenarios and questions of the various Jedis that came across his way. He was never telling them what to do. He would pose questions that would make them work it out for themselves. And when we talk about CEOs, one of the biggest mistakes CEOs make, and one of the biggest mistakes I've made in my career, is there's an assumption that that senior team that operate and sort of sit around the boardroom table with you are as capable and as effective and as impactful as the job title says you expect them to be. Rarely, if ever, does that executive team live up to those expectations. And yet the CEO thinks, well, I've got a chief marketing officer, so marketing should be fine. I've got a chief HR officer, so people strategy. I've got a chief sales commercial officer, so the revenue should be, and so on around the table. But actually, even at that most senior level, where an organization will look up and go, well, they're the gurus, they're the Jedi Knights, they're the ones that have perfected leadership. I often find there's an awful lot of issues and concerns at that level, let alone the further you go down the organization. Too many C-level executives, particularly CEOs, John, believe that because somebody's holding a lightsaber, then therefore they must be a very capable, successful Jedi Knight. Very often when you put them under pressure, they don't even know where the on button is. And then the CEO is sort of Yoda at the top of the organization going, why is the Imperial baddies about to wipe us out? Well, it's probably because you've got some people around the Jedi table who might hold a lightsaber but have no idea how to deploy it. And even when I get into working with organizations, there is a reticence, a real resistance from executives to go through the process. And I don't know whether that's because they're very, very busy or they're very, very nervous that I might expose, not deliberately, but they may be proven to, here's a lightsaber, use it. Where's the on button, Steve? And you're like, well, you're sort of meant to be. I don't know how on earth we got onto Jedis and Yoda, John. I have no idea, but hopefully we're making sense to you and I about the principles for leadership.
No, I absolutely agree. Your point about leaders, senior leaders not willing to go through the process, I can't tell you how many times I've seen that in the simulation work I did. I've actually had senior leaders, I come in, I'm the simulation guy. Here's the simulation. Here's the scenario. We're going to play this. I've got 7 tables playing stakeholder groups, and we're going to create a complex decision-making environment. I'm going to make it look like the real world. Nobody gets hurt. We're just going to practice. And if you get it wrong here, guess what? It's okay. That's the whole idea. It's the training. Get it wrong here. When you go out in the real world, you'll have a much better sense of what to do. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen senior leaders get up and walk out. They don't want any part of it. And I absolutely
And what's that? Is that ego, arrogance, or in between?
I think it's a combination probably of ego. And the second one is, I know I'm thinking of why I could see this person's face in front of me, is that they felt they were going to be shown to be incompetent.
Correct.
They couldn't hack it. They couldn't do the job. I remember when I was doing this, I was working with a group of wonderful people that I co-facilitated with. I can remember the look on one of my co-facilitators' face. He a very senior guy. This was in a law enforcement area, very senior, former assistant chief of police. We had trained for years together. When this one individual got up and walked out, he just gave me the look. Yeah, we know what this is all about, and my job was to play straight down the line. People loved it. They had a great time, learned a lot, got great reviews, all those kinds of things. And people learned a lot. They got a chance to try something new in a safe environment. But the point of the matter that you've made is a wonderful point, and that is people know they're going to be exposed, and they don't want other people to see it or to know it. So, and yet, going back to your point, when we talked about it initially, unless you do these kinds of practices, unless you take them through the process for several months, where they can actually try it, do it, see what happens. What went wrong? Oh, okay, that's right. Let's try it from this perspective. Then all of a sudden they build competency, and they build consistency, and they build confidence that, they can handle the job now. We're beating this dead horse to death, and that is you just can't walk in and do a singular event, a leadership development, as you so aptly pointed out, 90 minutes, and everybody walks away the most accomplished leader on the planet. So I absolutely agree. We are getting close to the end. And so This has been a wonderful conversation. I love having conversations with like-minded people. It's wonderful. So I'm just going to ask you this last question. What does the future hold for you, Stephen? Where do you see yourself going? What do you want to accomplish in the next 2 or 3 years?
Oh, wow, that's as good as your first one about tell us about your early life, what got you here. Well, practically, I'm working on book number 3. The publishers would like the first manuscript by the end of March, I think. So I'm working very hard on that. And that book is, I'm not quite got a working title on it yet, but it's effectively trying to put into print what leadership success engineering, effectively almost the handbook is what I'm going to try and do in 40, 50,000 words. But anyway, we'll see how that goes. The future for me, John, is, I said it earlier, I am most alive when I'm sat in front of a number of other practitioners. When a leader at the start of his or her journey, a leader in the middle, or a leader at the very top are sort of sat round a table metaphorically with me, or in the sort of execution and implementation stage when we're sat in their businesses, in their offices with their teams, sleeves rolled up saying, go on, show me. Prove that you've learned and understood and applied what you said you were going to do. It's the best feeling in the world. It's the best satisfaction for somebody that has a passion for helping others and serving others, particularly that wear the leadership badge. John, the more time I can spend not on the internet and even in things like this, which is wonderfully enjoyable, the more time I can spend in classrooms and actually in organizations with leaders, the happiest I am. So if I spend the next 3 or 4 years doing lots of that, I'll be a happy guy.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's nothing better in the world than to sit there and watch, as I like to say, the lights go on.
Great expression.
Watch, you say something and all of a sudden you see somebody go, oh, I get it now. Now I understand. And then saying, here's the first 2 or 3 steps I would take to try it out.
But then the important bit is they then go, they sit in the classroom and go, I've never thought of it like that. Great, write that down. And they write it down. It goes on the plan. And then 30 days later, when I have my first accountability check-in with them, hey, how did you do? Do you know what, Steve? I did it in the first performance review with this guy, and it really worked. You can see they almost go a foot taller. And that's one tiny piece of a huge 1,000-piece jigsaw that we call leadership. But actually, the one piece is when they go, I'm going to try that again. It doesn't always happen. I come across lots of people who will give me excuses why they couldn't apply the training, and therefore we push them harder to do it next time. But when it does happen, I love your expression. When the lights come on, it's like, boom.
Yeah, it's magic. There's no question about it. Listen, Stephen, thank you so much for being here with me on the podcast today. I can't thank you enough. It's been great. It's been very insightful, a wonderful interview. I want to wish you all the greatest success in the future. Health to you and your family. Be well and do good things. Thank you.
I send all of those reciprocal wishes right back to you and yours. Lovely talking to you.
Thanks. See you again.
Take care.
Bye. This is Dr. John Dentico. Remember, meaning is the new money, but it requires building the structures that deliver it. If today's conversation challenged your thinking or gave you a framework worth implementing, share it with a leader who needs to hear it. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit throttleupleadership.com for more resources. Until next time, keep throttling up and keep the people at the center of everything you do.